Sometimes silence isn't distance, it's hesitation. Sometimes pulling away isn't rejection, it's a fear of vulnerability. When someone with avoidant patterns still has feelings but doesn't know how to return, their behavior can become confusing, indirect, and emotionally guarded. In this script, we explore the subtle signs that may reveal they want you back, along with the one powerful shift they may be quietly waiting to see before making a move. When emotional calm becomes your natural state, everything begins to change. Emotional calm doesn't mean suppressing your feelings or pretending you don't care. It means learning how to regulate your emotions instead of allowing them to control your reactions. People with avoidant tendencies can be highly sensitive to emotional intensity. When the emotional atmosphere feels overwhelming, demanding, or unpredictable, their instinct may be to pull away. But when your emotional presence feels stable, grounded, and peaceful, it creates a sense of safety that can gently encourage them to move closer. Emotional calm shows that you are in control of yourself rather than being driven by fear, anxiety, or insecurity. This kind of stability communicates maturity, strength, and inner balance. It tells the other person that closeness doesn't have to lead to chaos, conflict, or emotional pressure. Instead, it can offer ease, understanding, and room to breathe. That can feel deeply reassuring to someone who fears emotional entanglement. When you remain calm during moments of uncertainty, you demonstrate emotional awareness. You pause before responding. You choose thoughtful words instead of impulsive reactions. You allow silence to exist without immediately panicking. This restraint becomes powerful because it changes the emotional dynamic. Instead of chasing, questioning, or demanding immediate clarity, you allow space for emotions to settle. And sometimes that space becomes exactly what allows connection to return naturally. Emotional calm also interrupts unhealthy relationship cycles. Rather than triggering their fear-based patterns, you introduce a different emotional experience, one that feels soothing instead of stressful. Over time, this can reshape what they associate with closeness. They may begin connecting your presence with peace instead of pressure. This emotional reconditioning can be subtle, but it can still be meaningful. It makes emotional closeness feel less threatening and potentially more comfortable. Calm energy can also increase emotional curiosity. When you are centered, you become less reactive and less dependent on immediate responses. Your composure communicates confidence. Your silence can carry depth. Your presence feels grounded. This can create curiosity and quiet longing. They may begin wondering about your emotional world, your personal growth, and the strength you've developed within yourself. But most importantly, emotional calm empowers you. You stop placing your emotional stability in someone else's hands. You stop needing constant reassurance just to feel okay. You become grounded within yourself. And that inner security can change the entire way you experience connection. Emotional calm is not a trick for getting someone back. It is an internal transformation that changes the way you approach relationships altogether. When your emotional world becomes steadier, more balanced, and more peaceful, connection stops feeling like a battlefield and starts feeling more like a place where two people can meet without fear. Self-respect changes the emotional dynamic even further. When you genuinely respect yourself, your behavior naturally moves away from chasing validation and towards standing firmly in your own worth. You no longer feel compelled to prove yourself, over-explain, or convince someone to choose you. Instead, your presence becomes grounded, calm, and confident. This internal shift can influence how other people respond to you. Someone with avoidant tendencies may notice the difference because self-respect removes emotional pressure and replaces it with balance. When self-respect is present, you stop accepting mixed signals, emotional inconsistency, or unclear intentions as though they are all you deserve. You don't beg for attention or settle for tiny pieces of affection. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you more emotionally secure. You begin valuing your time, your energy, and your emotional investment. This naturally creates healthier boundaries, and those boundaries can sometimes make connection feel safer rather than more distant. Self-respect communicates a quiet message. I know my value. I don't need to chase what is right for me. That energy can be powerful. It can create curiosity, admiration, and emotional attraction. When someone notices that you are no longer constantly pursuing them, they may begin reassessing the connection. Your absence can suddenly become more noticeable because your attention is no longer always available. They may begin recognizing the emotional space they helped create, and that awareness can sometimes awaken a desire to reconnect. Respecting yourself also changes the way you communicate. You become clearer, calmer, and more direct instead of overly emotional, reactive, or defensive. You express your needs without shame or fear. You listen without abandoning your own position. That kind of emotional maturity creates safety while preserving your dignity. It shows that closeness does not require self-sacrifice. Healthy closeness requires mutual respect. Self-respect also restores your emotional power. You stop placing another person at the center of your emotional universe and begin bringing that attention back to yourself. You focus on your growth, healing, goals, and happiness. As your life becomes fuller, your emotional energy changes. You stop waiting to be chosen. You begin choosing yourself. And that self-choosing energy can change everything. When someone sees you honoring your own worth, they may begin questioning their previous behavior. They reflect, they wonder, they reconsider. Not because you forced them to change, but because your self-respect makes the old dynamic harder to continue. This can create emotional tension, the kind that may lead to reflection, longing, and eventually renewed contact. And here's the part many people misunderstand. Self-respect isn't about playing hard to get. It's about becoming emotionally whole. When you stand firmly in your worth, connection becomes a choice rather than a need. And when connection becomes a choice, it can become more meaningful, balanced, and fulfilling. When authentic happiness becomes part of your natural state, it begins showing up throughout your entire life. Authentic happiness isn't about forcing yourself to smile or pretending everything is perfect. It is a deeper sense of fulfillment, self-acceptance, and genuine joy that comes from living according to your values, interests, and personal direction. This energy can feel attractive because it communicates emotional independence. People with avoidant tendencies may naturally notice individuals who possess inner stability and a sense of vitality because it creates curiosity and admiration. They see someone who is genuinely thriving in their own world and may feel a subtle pull toward that energy. Authentic happiness demonstrates that your well-being doesn't depend entirely on another person. You're not constantly anxious about being ignored, rejected, or abandoned. You are secure enough to enjoy your own life. That creates an emotional contrast for someone who struggles with intimacy. When they notice that your happiness exists without their constant involvement, they may begin recognizing an emotional gap they previously overlooked. Instead of chasing them, your happiness becomes a quiet force that can draw attention back toward you because it creates longing without demanding anything. Living authentically also means becoming fully engaged with your own life, pursuing hobbies that excite you, spending time with people who genuinely support you, working toward career goals, exploring interests and passions that make you feel alive, building routines that give your days meaning. When your life becomes fuller, your emotional energy becomes less focused on whether someone is coming closer or moving away. You become more present in your own experience, and that shift can be noticed. Not because you're trying to make someone jealous, but because genuine fulfillment changes the way you carry yourself. You speak differently. You move differently. You respond differently. You no longer communicate from a place of emotional hunger. You communicate from a place of abundance. And that can make reconnecting feel less threatening because there is no longer the same pressure to immediately define everything. You can allow a connection to develop naturally while still honoring your own boundaries. So if you're wondering what shift can quietly change the dynamic, don't focus on becoming someone else for them. Focus on becoming more deeply yourself. Calm your emotional world, strengthen your self-respect, build authentic happiness. Let your life become meaningful whether they return or not. Because when you stop trying to control someone else's decision and start creating peace within your own life, something important happens. You become free. And from that place of freedom, any connection that returns has the opportunity to be chosen consciously rather than desperately pursued. When your life feels full, it quietly communicates that you are already whole on your own. People with avoidant patterns may be drawn to this energy because it can feel safe and undemanding. Your happiness doesn't ask anything from them. It simply invites them to step into your world if they genuinely choose to. Your authentic presence becomes a mirror, showing them an emotional reality they may have been missing. Happiness also changes the way you communicate and interact. When you are genuinely content, your voice, expressions, body language, and overall presence naturally reflect warmth, calmness, and positivity. Conversations become easier and more enjoyable, which can lower emotional defenses. People with avoidant tendencies are often uncomfortable with intensity and drama, but authentic happiness creates lightness and ease. They can begin associating your presence with comfort, enjoyment, and inspiration, making the idea of reconnecting feel less threatening. Authentic happiness also strengthens confidence and self-assurance. You no longer depend on someone else's approval because your emotional foundation already exists within you. That independence can be deeply attractive because it changes the usual pattern of emotional pursuit. Instead of needing another person to make you feel complete, you become someone who naturally carries fulfillment within themselves. This can make them reconsider the emotional choices they made and the distance they created. Ultimately, authentic happiness can be transformative because it allows someone with avoidant tendencies to see you as stable, complete, and naturally magnetic. It creates attraction without manipulation and can invite reconnection through genuine curiosity rather than obligation. Your happiness becomes a quiet invitation to bridge the gap without pressure and reopen the door under healthier conditions. Emotional maturity is another powerful quality that can strengthen attraction and connection, especially with someone who has avoidant tendencies. Emotional maturity isn't about hiding feelings or acting as though everything is fine. It's about understanding what you feel, managing your reactions, and responding with intention rather than impulse. When you approach interactions from emotional stability, you communicate that closeness doesn't have to become overwhelming or chaotic. People with avoidant patterns can be especially sensitive to intense emotional displays because they may trigger fears of being consumed, controlled, or losing their independence. Emotional maturity offers a different message. It shows that intimacy can be steady, respectful, and emotionally safe. When you demonstrate emotional maturity, you learn to pause before responding. Instead of immediately blaming, attacking, or overanalyzing, you notice what you're feeling and choose a response that reflects clarity and self-control. You communicate directly without pleading or attacking. You establish boundaries without becoming afraid of disagreement. This behavior communicates self-awareness and emotional responsibility, which can create a strong sense of safety for someone who fears becoming emotionally trapped. The calm energy of emotional maturity can become attractive because it is so different from the cycles of stress, conflict, or emotional dependence that can develop in unstable relationships. Emotional maturity also includes empathy and understanding, but it must remain balanced. You can recognize someone's struggles, fears, or emotional distance without allowing those struggles to take over your entire emotional world. You respond with compassion rather than judgment and patience rather than pressure. This creates an environment where vulnerability can develop at a natural pace. Someone with avoidant tendencies may be more willing to lower their defenses when they feel understood instead of constantly analyzed. Emotional maturity creates that sense of understanding without demanding immediate openness. Another important part of emotional maturity is consistency in behavior. Emotional highs and lows, unpredictable reactions, and sudden mood changes can make closeness feel unsafe. By maintaining relatively steady emotional responses, you create trust and predictability. Over time, the other person can begin associating you with reliability and emotional safety, which may make it easier for them to participate rather than retreat. This consistency shows that connection can be stable and fulfilling instead of frightening or exhausting. Emotional maturity also strengthens self-respect and personal boundaries. You stop accepting disrespect, manipulation, or emotional games as normal. Instead, you communicate your expectations clearly and protect your emotional space. This demonstrates that connection can be based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency, which can feel especially reassuring to someone who fears losing control in relationships. Ultimately, emotional maturity is not about controlling someone or using psychology to make them return. It is about becoming a person whose presence feels calm, steady, and emotionally safe. When you embody these qualities, you reduce unnecessary chaos and replace it with trust, stability, and genuine curiosity. That can naturally make reconnection feel more comfortable and desirable. And if you've been waiting for one dramatic move to change everything, pay attention to this instead. Sometimes the strongest shift is not something you say. It is the emotional atmosphere you create simply by becoming more grounded. Consistency is another foundation of trust and emotional safety, especially when interacting with someone who has avoidant tendencies. People with avoidant patterns can be highly sensitive to unpredictability and emotional volatility. When interactions constantly swing between intense closeness and sudden distance, it can reinforce the belief that intimacy will eventually become overwhelming or demanding. Consistency communicates something very different: reliability, stability, and emotional security. It shows that your presence is reasonably predictable, your boundaries remain steady, and your actions match your values. This creates an environment where the other person can gradually lower their guard without feeling like the ground is constantly moving beneath them. Consistency does not mean becoming rigid or emotionless. It means showing up in a balanced way. It means responding thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively, keeping reasonable promises, and maintaining a stable tone even when emotions become difficult. People with avoidant tendencies often notice these subtle cues. They recognize when someone responds with calmness instead of emotional turbulence. Every consistent action communicates something important. This connection can feel safe. Over time, repeated experiences of stability can gradually weaken defensive patterns built around fear or past emotional experiences. Consistency also strengthens self-respect. When you repeatedly maintain your boundaries and communicate clearly, you demonstrate that you value your own emotional space. This can be reassuring because it shows that closeness with you does not require chaos, pressure, or losing yourself. You become someone who can offer connection without abandoning your own identity, someone whose presence feels balanced and dependable, that can make returning to the relationship feel more manageable. Another important part of consistency is emotional availability. Being emotionally consistent does not mean oversharing, constantly checking in, or forcing intimacy. It means being present when it matters, listening carefully, and engaging sincerely. It also means maintaining composure during disagreements, uncertainty, or moments when things don't go according to plan. This stability can allow someone with avoidant tendencies to experiment with vulnerability at their own pace. They begin discovering that emotional interaction with you doesn't automatically lead to overwhelming demands because the foundation remains steady. Consistency builds credibility over time. Every calm, respectful, grounded interaction reinforces the idea that your emotional responses are dependable and that your presence can be a safe place to return to. People with avoidant tendencies may respond better to environments where trust develops slowly, rather than being demanded instantly, and consistency provides that gradual reassurance. With enough repeated experiences, steady behavior can create an emotional pull that words alone cannot produce. It becomes an unspoken invitation, allowing connection to develop again in a way that feels safe and mutually respectful. In the end, consistency can transform a relationship from a cycle of unpredictability into a space built around trust and stability. When you remain steady, respectful, emotionally grounded, and true to yourself, you are no longer communicating that the relationship is a place of pressure. You are communicating that connection can coexist with freedom, that closeness can exist without control, that disagreements do not automatically mean abandonment, and that space does not have to mean rejection. The goal isn't to become perfectly predictable or to use consistency as a tactic. The goal is to create a healthier emotional environment while continuing to protect your own needs. If the other person chooses to return, they should be returning because they genuinely want to participate in that healthier connection. And if they don't, your stability still belongs to you. That is the real power of emotional grounding. You stop building your peace around someone else's decision and start building a life where peace is already present.